I want to get this question over with. All you're doing is forever. Quick question. Keir Starmer, I'm asking you to leave now, because otherwise I'll name you. I'm not having it, and I've warned you before. It's the same people.
The interruption does not announce itself. It arrives as a break in rhythm. A voice stops mid-sentence. Papers remain half-lifted, then settle back onto desks. The usual cross-talk that fills the chamber fails to resume. For a moment, no one is certain whether to continue or to wait. The sound level drops, not because of instruction, but because movement pauses on its own. Members glance toward the centre, then toward the benches, then toward the chair. Attention shifts before anyone speaks. The space, designed for noise and collision, begins to behave differently. It tightens. The air feels procedural, controlled, deliberate. No one reacts outwardly. There is no visible shock. What spreads instead is restraint. Bodies lean back. Hands lower. Notes are set aside without being closed. The instinct is not to argue, but to observe. The silence is noticeable because it does not belong here. Parliament is built on interruption, on momentum, on pressure. This pause interrupts all three. It suggests that something has occurred that overrides routine, something that does not require explanation to those inside the room. Seconds pass longer than they should. The chair remains still. Members wait for a signal that does not come immediately. The absence of clarification becomes its own message. Nothing has been named. No ruling has been read into the record yet. But the chamber already understands that a line has been crossed. This is not debate slowing down. This is process asserting itself. And once that happens, the room knows to stay quiet until told otherwise. The restraint becomes coordinated almost immediately. No one rushes to fill the gap. No point of order is shouted across the floor. Even those who normally seize hesitation as opportunity remain seated. It is not confusion holding the chamber in place. It is recognition. Officials closest to the chair exchange brief looks, then still themselves. Staff do not move forward with notes or prompts. There is no attempt to clarify what the public has not yet been told. The instinct is to pause, not to explain. What replaces noise is caution. The kind that appears when rules, not personalities, begin to dominate the moment. Members adjust their posture. Voices, when they return at all, are quieter. The chamber behaves as if it has entered a different mode of operation. This is not emotional reaction. There is no visible anger, no outrage, no satisfaction. The absence of those signals is itself telling. It suggests that something procedural has asserted priority over debate, over performance, over instinct. The audience senses it even without context. A boundary has been crossed. The room knows it and acts accordingly. When institutions take control, they do not announce themselves loudly. They impose discipline first. The pause stretches, deliberate now. Whatever just occurred has moved beyond argument. And until the process finishes asserting itself, no one inside the chamber is willing to pretend otherwise. Only now do the names begin to surface. Attention settles on Keir Starmer, no longer positioned as an active participant, but as the focus of the room's recalibration. Nearby, Nigel Farage is also drawn into view, not through speech, but through the way members orient themselves toward his bench. The chamber does not erupt at the recognition. It tightens further. Parliament remains the setting, but it no longer feels like a forum for exchange. It feels administrative. Observers notice how the chair maintains stillness, how staff remain poised but inactive, how the floor is not yielded back to debate. A clash is understood to have occurred, yet no one rushes to frame it. What registers instead is posture. Starmer's movement is limited, controlled. Farage does not press forward. Neither side appears eager to claim the moment. The absence of reaction is deliberate. It signals that whatever just happened is no longer being handled rhetorically. The word removal begins to circulate quietly, not announced, not argued. It carries weight precisely because it arrives without explanation. Members respond by staying seated. Conversations do not restart. There is no attempt to reinterpret events in real time. Procedure is doing the talking now. The silence confirms it. When Parliament moves into this mode, outcomes are not debated publicly. They are managed. The audience understands before the details arrive. This is no longer about the clash itself. It is about what follows when the chamber decides the rules have been tested and response must come through process, not performance. The real story is not the clash that led here. It is what happened after it stopped. In moments like this, attention usually stays fixed on words exchanged, on tone, on who provoked whom. That instinct fails now. Because the decisive movement did not come from rhetoric. It came from control shifting hands. Procedural protection has been withdrawn. Not symbolically, but operationally. One side no longer controls how the moment is framed, when it is explained, or whether it can be redirected back into argument. The room itself has taken that option away. At the same time, leverage has moved elsewhere. Not to a voice raised louder than the rest, but to the rules that govern who may speak, who may remain, and who must step aside. Authority is no longer being negotiated through exchange. It is being enforced through structure. This is why narrative control collapses so quickly. There is no opportunity to spin, to contextualize, to escalate theatrically. The institution has closed that window. Once that happens, intention no longer matters. Only compliance does. What looks outwardly like restraint is actually escalation of a different kind. The escalation of process. Debate thrives on visibility and momentum. Procedure thrives on quiet and inevitability. One has just replaced the other. That is the shift. Not a personal confrontation, but an institutional one. And once Parliament moves from argument to enforcement, the outcome is no longer shaped by who speaks best in the moment, but by who still operates within the rules that now control it. What follows is not performance. It is documentation. Parliament operates on thresholds that are written long before any individual reaches them. Conduct is measured against standing orders, not temperament. Authority rests with the speaker, not the moment. When those thresholds are crossed, response is not optional. It is prescribed. The formal steps are familiar to those inside the chamber. A warning is issued. It is noted. Continued disruption is assessed against the record, not the exchange itself. Once that assessment is made, the speaker's authority activates a narrow set of actions that do not require debate or consent. Those actions are logged. The language used is procedural, precise, and intentionally restrained. It appears in the official record, not as commentary, but a sequence. Time. Instruction. Compliance. Each step builds on the last. Standing orders exist to remove discretion from volatile moments. They are designed to prevent escalation by cutting it off early, even when the underlying disagreement remains unresolved. That is why precedent matters more than passion here. Each application reinforces the next. Nothing about this relies on interpretation after the fact. The documentation speaks for itself. The authority exercised is traceable, reviewable, and consistent with prior enforcement. That consistency is what gives it weight. As the record accumulates, spectacle becomes irrelevant. What remains is a clear procedural trail. One that shows how control was transferred from individuals to the institution itself. And once that trail is established, it cannot be undone by argument. It can only be followed. This is the moment the line becomes visible. Removal is not a warning. It is the confirmation that warnings are over. Once it happens, posture changes for everyone involved, not just the individual affected. The chamber understands that the rules are no longer sitting in reserve. They are active. Up to this point, conduct exists in a grey zone. Language can be tested. Limits can be approached. The system allows that by design. But once enforcement occurs, that flexibility disappears. The margin is gone. From here forward, future conduct is no longer interpreted generously. It is assessed mechanically. The benefit of doubt is replaced by reference to what has already been done. Precedent is no longer abstract. It has just been created. This is why the room stays quiet. Members recalibrate in real time. The cost of misjudgment has been demonstrated, not threatened. When enforcement replaces warning, the risk calculation changes immediately. There is no ambiguity left to debate. The authority of the chair has been exercised fully and visibly. That action closes off alternative readings of the rules. It establishes a boundary that does not need to be restated. Once a line is enforced, It does not move again in the same sitting. The system has spoken. And when it does, the only remaining choice is compliance. The impact does not stay contained to the chamber. Within minutes, party strategy begins to adjust. Messages that might have been issued are held back. Statements are softened, then delayed, then abandoned altogether. Leadership understands that speaking too quickly risks compounding what has already moved into procedural territory. Inside Westminster, silence is rarely accidental. It is often tactical. When institutions assert control, parties respond by reducing exposure. Commentary is pulled inward. Discipline replaces improvisation. This is why senior figures do not rush to defend or escalate. Any public framing now risks conflicting with an active process. Restraint becomes the safer position, not because the stakes are lower, but because they are higher. Behind the scenes, coordination tightens. Talking points narrow. Individuals are reminded that visibility can work against them once enforcement is underway. The emphasis shifts from persuasion to containment. To an outside audience, the lack of response can appear evasive. Inside the system, it is read differently. It signals recognition that the moment has moved beyond messaging. When the rules take over, commentary loses its leverage. This is how institutional authority reshapes behavior without issuing instructions. The absence of reaction becomes the clearest signal that control has changed hands. And in Westminster, that kind of silence is rarely misunderstood. Once enforcement is triggered, the process no longer depends on attention. It depends on continuation. Institutions respond by tightening their internal rhythms. Monitoring increases quietly. Staff document rather than speculate. Compliance becomes the priority, not resolution. Every subsequent action is weighed against what has already been recorded. This is how momentum works inside procedural systems. It does not accelerate through headlines. It advances through repetition. Each step reinforces the last, narrowing options without announcing that it is doing so. Containment becomes the shared objective. Not to hide what happened, but to prevent it from spreading beyond the structures already equipped to manage it. That is why escalation stays internal. The fewer variables introduced, the more predictable the outcome. The chamber resumes function, but under altered conditions. Members are more precise. Interventions are shorter. Risk tolerance drops. The memory of enforcement shapes behavior more effectively than any reminder could. Nothing about this feels dramatic. That is the point. Institutions exert the most control when they no longer need to demonstrate it. The system moves forward steadily, guided by rules that are now being actively applied. From here, reversal is unlikely. Not because anyone wills it so, but because the process has already engaged its own safeguards. And once those are in motion, they do not pause for commentary. At this point, the outcome no longer depends on personalities. Once parliamentary authority is enforced, the balance does not simply reset. It recalibrates. The chamber has demonstrated that it will act, and that demonstration carries forward. From here on, options narrow with each step taken under active procedure. Performance loses its utility. Argument no longer reshapes the moment. The rules now determine pace, limits, and consequence. What once relied on judgment now relies on reference. This is why the process becomes self-sustaining. Every future decision is anchored to what has already been enforced. There is no return to informal tolerance. The margin for error has been removed by example. The institution is prepared because it has already acted. It does not need to escalate again to maintain authority. The signal has been sent and it holds. What remains is not uncertainty, but sequence. Procedure following procedure, each one quieter than the last, each one harder to interrupt. That is how control endures inside Parliament. And once it reaches this stage, the question is no longer what might happen next. It is simply how far the process will carry what has already begun.